Okay. Well, like Ruth, I came out in 1971 as well. But I was only 5 years old.
Oh.
I was precocious. Thank you. Are queer neighborhoods worth saving? Yes, they are worth saving. One, it's our space. We are a community that has never had a space of its own. We were always strangers in a strange land in the world of heterosexuals. Though we often lived in ghettos, we only started declaring those spaces our own after Stonewall. It was the blood, sweat, and tears of thousands of activists across this country that made neighborhoods like the West Village, the Castro, DuPont Circle, etc. ours. Two, it's important to have a refuge for young queers and others, an oasis, as others have said, a place that is as safe as one can be from queer bashings and presumably discrimination, although that certainly hasn't been the case for queers of color, lesbians, or transgender folks. Three, it's also important to have an identifiable political base. That suited us very well here in San Francisco. It's helped queers to gain substantial political clout in City Hall. Having a specific area that politicians can point to, can go to, and shake hands and kiss lesbian babies has really solidified the gay vote, our political muscle in San Francisco. On the other hand, queer neighborhoods are not worth saving. Queer neighborhoods in the big cities in this country are not what they used to be. In fact, they probably never were what they're cracked up to be. It's hard to tell how much of the image we have of them is wishful thinking or 70s nostalgia. Some of the key issues that need to be addressed in queer neighborhoods in general, and the Castro in specific, in order for them to be worth saving, include the following. Number one, gentrification that is displacing poor and working class queers, especially youth, people with AIDS, and seniors. Two, the general lack of diversity in terms of race and class. The Castro, as with many other queer neighborhoods, is heavily white and male. Three, the disappearance of nonprofits and activist groups that used to rent space above the shops on Castro Street. They were driven out by high rents. Ditto for the social services, such as the homeless shelter, the food program, lots of other things that have been driven out of the Castro. Four, the lack of affordable housing that puts renting in the Castro beyond the means of working class and poor queers. Five, the lack of diversity among business owners, further establishing the neighborhood as white, solidly white and male. Six, the proliferation of chain stores. How is it in anyone's wildest nightmare that Castro and Market, the most famous intersection, queer intersection in the world, has two, count them, two chain stores parallel to each other? I won't mention them because I don't want to give any more publicity. Think about it. The world's most famous queer intersection, dominated by chain stores. Seven, the opposition of merchants to street closings, like when the sisters wanted to have their 20th or 25th, whatever it was, anniversary celebration on Easter Sunday, and the merchants set off a controversy that ended up not only with the Board of Supervisors having to decide the issue, but with Tom Amiano being bashed in the mayoral race and being Catholic baited, as I call it. You know, being accused of being anti-Catholic. Tom Amiano, an Italian Catholic. The Castro is heading in a bad direction. It's been heading that way for at least a decade. Ever since the .com boom, as I like to call it, hit like the old gold rush of another era. There was gold in them there hills. It was called real estate. And greedy realtors and landlords cashed in big time, evicting long-term tenants with AIDS and jacking up the rents of commercial spaces so that the little guys had no prayer of running a business anymore. Harvey Milk would never have had a camera store during the .com boom. An immediate result of the .com boom was that nonprofits and community activist groups were pushed out. Also, queer kids who fled here from all over were suddenly finding they couldn't afford to live anywhere, even with jobs. Many ended up in the streets of the Castro, panhandling for something to eat. The merchants' response, very compassionate. A poster campaign asking people not to give out change. It was mean-spirited, and it didn't address the basic problem, the rising rents and the minimum wage that didn't allow someone to afford a roof over their heads and the luxury of eating. I and other folks in the Castro immediately organized a group to address this growing problem of homelessness among queer youth. We started a food program at MCC on Eureka Street and a shower project at Mission High on 18th Street. We set up 3 temporary shelters. When the final one closed after 2.5 years of being located at Castro Market, that location was forced to move into another neighborhood outside of the Castro. All of those services were vehemently opposed by many neighbors and business people in the Castro. Could you ever have imagined that 20 years ago? When the dot-com bubble burst, the greedy real estate interests found yet another way to continue raking in the dough. TICs, tenancies in common. And I'm going to be hated for saying this. Does everybody know what they are, or do I need to go into my rap? I'd rather not if everybody knows what they are. Basically, they're a loophole in the condo conversion law. People use the Ellis Act. That's what's happening with Ruth, and that's probably what the fate of her building is. Use the Ellis Act, get around rent control, evict all the tenants, sell interest in the property to a bunch of people, a 6-unit building, sell it to 6 people, 6 couples, 6 families, whatever. They share a mortgage on the place. As part of the deal, they get to own, move into, whatever, one of the units, although they don't own the unit. They own a percentage of the property. People who buy TCs want to condo convert because owning this thing, with a bunch of other people with one mortgage is not the best way to own something. So they want to condo convert. In the Castro, what we saw happening after the dot-com boom bust was that more and more of the real estate speculators were going in and buying buildings. A speculator is a particular kind of human animal who buys a building. Say he buys it for $500,000. I know it's unrealistic, but just because I can't do math. Say he buys it for $500,000, right? It's got 4 units. He then turns around and sells each of those units for $500,000, or the percentage. So you got 4 people paying $500,000. What is that? $2 million? He walks away with $1.5 million profit. Now, it's not quite that clean. There's probably some other expenses in there, but basically that's the basic crude math. He walks away with $1.5 million. There are people whose whole lives is about buying a building, making the $1.5 million, and then turning around and buying another building with that $1.5 million, flipping that building in 2 months, going and buying another building. This is the game that we saw happening, and this is what hit the Castro like another AIDS epidemic. Because the buildings they were buying are buildings that are damaged, which in real estate terms basically means it's a rent-controlled building with long-term tenants who are paying low rent. Therefore, they can't get as much money for the building as they would like to get, because the building's damaged. So therefore, they buy the building cheaper. So you see what I'm getting at here? So the victims of most of these Ellis Act evictions in the Castro have been long-term tenants with AIDS who survived the AIDS epidemic only to be thrown out in the streets by real estate speculators, some of whom were gay. You get the irony there? Or am I the only one who's seeing the tragic irony in that situation? So nobody knows ultimately how many people. There's lots of numbers that float around. The rent board's got their statistics, but those are not the best statistics, because those are only the statistics that based on the people who actually filed the Ellis Act notice with the rent board, which a lot of landlords don't do, or a lot of speculators don't do. So, what's the solution to all this? And being the kind of person I am, I've come up with some solutions. And they're also probably not going to be very popular.